Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. This could have been one of those really negative, whingy, moany videos, but thankfully the week and the way it was heading had a slight upturn right at the end of it with the Aston Villa match. I was there at Villa Park for something that was very different. I wouldn't say it was the greatest performance in the world, but it was better. I think that was all that Tottenham fans kind of needed. And Jose Mourinho and the squad to finish that week. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the absolutely embarrassing collapse in Croatia, other than to say, well, everyone saw it. Obviously, I couldn't travel to Croatia. We're not allowed to do that right now. So I do find that when I'm covering the games on the TV, I get far more frustrated than when I'm in the stadiums. For some reason, when I'm in the actual stadium, I think I probably switch very much into work mode as ultra professional and focused and all of that. Well, as professional as I can be. But I find when I'm at home, I do seem to rant and get quite angry at the television a lot. And that was certainly happening on Thursday night. It was, well, to be honest, I don't think anyone put it better than Hugo Lloris. I saw him getting some criticism for his stuff after the game. It's probably the same people that are saying that he's not an effective leader, he doesn't speak up, stuff like that. It's just, I thought he spoke so well. I thought he came out and absolutely summed up the situation. Disgrace. It was an absolute disgrace. Too many players coasting, just expecting to have won the game, and 2-0 up. And especially when he's repeating what Mourinho had said, that Mourinho had said, look, go out there and score a goal. Do not go out there just thinking this is job done. And even at half-time, Mourinho said, I told them, don't trust that scoreline. Do not do it. You have to keep competing, go out there. And Lloris said the manager couldn't have made it clear enough, and the players didn't do it. And I thought, for me, obviously the most interesting parts of his speech were that it was a reflection on the club right now and the kind of malaise that's going on in there. And also, he really dug out those players who hadn't been in the starting lineup. And he said, it was really passionate from him. He was like, it's no good just sitting there complaining if you haven't been in the sidelines. Support the team. And he's kind of pointing to the badge, said, support this. And I thought it was great. I think it was very much, you could say that this is a guy who's approaching the last year of his contract. He might not be at Spurs next season, potentially. Depends what kind of the decisions are made on what happens with him going forward. He could have just sat back and not really cared too much, and just let it all unfold. But he didn't. He had properly came out, and as far from what I understand, it ruffled a few feathers among some players, and that was kind of exactly the intention. And I think that's why you saw what you saw on Sunday. And I also was told that Mourinho apparently on the entire flight home was absolutely silent, didn't speak to anyone, just kind of taking it all in and ready to go through it. And then I think they kind of debriefed on Friday when they were all back at Hotspur Way. And the result was Sunday. It was much better. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't wonderful. It wasn't a performance for the ages. But I think Mourinho set out very clearly. His hand was forced in some ways, but he set out clearly to make a statement with his team selection and his bench and said, look, I want players. Well, he even said it afterwards. After the game on Sunday, he said, I want angry players. And that's exactly it. It's like, you don't want players who are just like, meh, I'll be out of here in the summer. That's just not what you want. Or you don't want players that maybe are thinking, if I don't play, the manager's gone. So meh. You want players that are absolutely playing for the badge, as Lloris said, and the club, and for each other, most importantly. That was the biggest thing about the Pochettino era, was that certainly over a couple of years, maybe as much as 4 years, he had a very tight-knit group. Once he'd weeded out some of the players that he kind of felt were doing similar to what Lloris is talking about right now, he did that at the start, and he got that core of players, and they became like a family. That family became a little bit dysfunctional towards the end, and people had their own ambitions because they weren't winning silverware and things like that. And so that did start to break down that family unit. But, we've come a long way since then, and not in a good way. And essentially, Mourinho has to rebuild that. He kind of has to do, if he's going to stick around for the long term, as he's saying he wants to do, then he's going to have to do what Pochettino did in about the first kind of 6 months, 8 months of his first year was just start to weed out the players that aren't just not going to have it. They're not interested and not going to be part of his mentality, which is a very different mentality to the Pochettino one. It will take a lot of getting used to, but some players are kind of responding to it. Some players aren't. And I just thought Sunday, as he said, it was about picking angry players. And, you look at the players that are out of there. You had Winks and Doherty completely out of the squad. Obviously, Son was injured. Lamela was suspended. Alderweireld and Aurier were both ill. Although I was told at the game, you might have seen, I tweeted it out, I was told it wasn't serious illnesses and they'd be able to hook up with their international teams. They literally flew out the next day to be on their international team. So it's one of those where you'd hope to believe anyway, that they were just not quite fitness levels because of the illness enough to perform on the Sunday night. On the Sunday night. But they were able to fly out the next day. So I'm not casting any aspersions or anything on that. I presume that's just a scenario that they had been recovering but weren't quite ready for the match. But either way, Mourinho's team and matchday squad very much reflected his anger and the anger he wanted to see from everyone else. To have two 16-year-olds on the bench was huge. I mean, the two there we spoke about, Winks and Doherty, there's no excuses for them not to be in there over those two 16-year-olds. You can maybe argue you needed Scarlett on the bench because he was pairing Vinicius and Kane up front. But still, there were decisions made and that the defence, the average age of the defence was 23 years old. Certainly he was making his feelings very clear. And I felt from the first minutes, I think I tweeted it out as well, that you could see an urgency. You could see Kane and Reguilon, people like that, absolutely sprinting off the pitch to get the ball for throw-on, stuff like that to keep momentum going. Like I say, it wasn't perfect. It was very much a team that hasn't played together as a unit too much. But you know what? They did the job. And, I mean, the other thing, of course, I've got to touch on Gareth Bale. We'll come to him a bit later. I'm going to talk about his comments as well this week on international break. But Bale obviously was dropped entirely from the squad entirely from the team, and he was on the bench and he was unused. It was a bit of a weird one, that, because our press area was right behind where the subs go and do their warm-up. So it was very clear to us. You could see that Bale, Dyer and Scarlett and Devine never warmed up throughout the entire match down that touchline. Obviously, everyone warmed up on the pitch before the game, but during the actual match itself, that quartet never were told to go out and warm up. Obviously, Joe Hart as well, but goalkeepers don't. So the only players that we saw warm up in front of us were Dele Alli, who didn't end up coming on. Who came on first? Ben Davies, Stephen Bergwijn, maybe before him. I think it was Davies came on first for Reguilon. Bergwijn and Moussa Sissoko. So the three subs and Dele Alli. It's not incredibly unusual. It is more often than not that most of the bench do warm up. There are occasions when they don't. I think the biggest thing for me was, when it came to Bale, was the fact that when he was going through that spell where he just wasn't even appearing in Premier League games, there was about a 2-month spell where he was barely even appearing. And during those times, he very rarely warmed up, and he was just sat there in a tracksuit as if he'd come along to kind of watch the game. And this was what Sunday night felt. He very much was there in his kind of, not shell suit, but the club tracksuit thing the whole time, and he never looked like there was any intention that he might come on. Which, I mean, there's two sides to it. North London derby, I thought he was woeful. I thought he was poor, and I think his performance probably... Yes, he was involved in the build-up to the Lamela goal, but I felt his kind of overall performance didn't help Matt Doherty behind him. He kind of left him quite exposed, and he wasn't doing enough in the forward momentum to justify leaving him exposed. Doherty wasn't good at all. Before you think I'm protecting Doherty there, I'm not. I'm saying they're kind of both at fault in their different ways. So he came off, and he looked thoroughly upset to come off, or annoyed. Didn't even look at Mourinho in the North London derby, but I kind of felt it was tough to justify him staying on, to be honest. Against Zagreb in Croatia, slightly different feelings on that. I actually did feel he got a bit of flack after that, but I kind of felt that he was one of the ones who was trying. He wasn't for their third goal, Orsic scored. He wasn't great in his efforts to kind of get back for that. But what I would say in his defence, you had Aurier, Ndombele and Sissoko, who all put in the... Oh, it was so bad. I mean, Aurier hanging out a leg. Those three in that moment... and we'll come to Ndombele, actually, and Sissoko, about things they did on Sunday night, which were better or worse. But Bale probably would have thought that those three could have handled one player, and they didn't. They just let him run on and score the goal that eventually won it for Zagreb. So Bale, do I think he should have been completely bombed out of the squad for Sunday? No, but then I don't know entirely what his reaction was afterwards and the thinking behind it and what happened. Again, I'm not going to guess. I don't know. But I just hope we're not going to go back to this thing with Bale where he just barely features, because I think when you harness him like you did in the month before the North London derby, he was phenomenal. And I hope Spurs need that for the rest of this season. So I hope he's not been bombed out entirely. But as it was, overall, definitely there was more fight, there was more hunger, there was more desire. And Mourinho made a comment afterwards about Devine and Scarlett, who he said, I want two 16-year-olds. Oh, I don't want two 16-year-olds, that sounds weird. I want two kids on the bench who I know will... they might only come on for 10 minutes, 10 seconds, but I want them to fight in those 10 minutes or 10 seconds as if it's the last 10 minutes or seconds of their career. And I get that. There were a lot of poor performances. Almost went Cilla Black there. Performances like that in Zagreb, and I'd also say the North London derby, where you kind of thought, what was the point in you even being there? And so I totally got that. I totally understood that, and I felt you didn't see that. The best representation of that on Sunday was the defence. Like I say, average age of 23, but after a shaky start, this is a new unit of 4 players and Larissa have not played together as a unit. Once they got into their kind of understanding, I thought they played really well. Like I say, young players, so there's little bits and moments where they were a little bit shaky, but on the whole, he got everything he wanted from his team encapsulated in that defence. They stopped Villa having a shot on goal in the first half at all, at home, at Villa Park. Apparently that's the first time it's happened in a home game for Villa since April 2014, which shows just how impressive that was. Yes, they didn't have Grealish, of course they didn't, but that's not to say they haven't been creating chances in previous games. So they did really well. Japhet Tanganga, anyone that reads my stuff or watches my videos knows my frustration with Japhet Tanganga's situation. I think he's probably the most composed defender Tottenham have. I do think he's been absolutely stuffed by Mourinho saying he's a right back instead of a centre back, which has kind of put him to the back of this queue at right back behind Aurier and Doherty, which he was barely always going to play in that. Whereas at centre back, I think he could have played more games. Yes, he's not the tallest centre back, but that's not always the be all and end all. I mean, Fabio Cannavaro, I remember, is World Player of the Year once, so won the Ballon d'Or, and he really wasn't a tall defender. And when we're talking about not tall, we're not talking about he's not 5'5" or something. He's a guy that is, I'm pretty sure he's still over 6 foot. And I think he's just so good. There were so many moments. I don't know whether it was his tendency or whether the instructions he was getting, but he wasn't bombing up the right-hand side. He was mainly tucking in, kind of making that back three that we saw last season with Davies on the other side. But he did have a couple of moments when he went forward. His footwork was really nice. He doesn't really know what to do, obviously, when he gets nearer the final third, but that's probably... you do wonder, if you look at the North London derby, I was talking about Bale and not covering and stuff, you do wonder what Tanganga at right back, sitting there, soaking stuff up, able to tuck in, would have done for Bale. Whether that actually would have freed up Bale to get further up the pitch and make more of an impact. I'm one of Tanganga's biggest cheerleaders because I think he's only 21, but I think he's got the maturity of someone much, much older, and his anticipation is superb. I thought Joe Rodon did very well, and I thought he kind of proved that he doesn't have to be babysat by 2 other defenders in a back 3. He really, I thought, was very good. Again, I'm going to caveat it with the fact that Villa Spurs weren't facing the attack of City, Liverpool, United, anything like that. Yes, Villa don't have the attacking riches, but like I say, they're a team that's done very well this year, and they can get at the goal. But I thought Rodon dealt with everything he kind of needed to. I thought Ollie Watkins, obviously just called up to the England squad, had a terrific season, was really pretty much marked out of the game. He really didn't do too much on Sunday night, and I thought Rodon was very calm and collecting what he did. Won a lot of duels. Sergio Reguilon, I felt a little bit iffy at the back. Probably maybe the shakiest of the back four at the back, but was a real threat going forward. Obviously, he picked up an injury, kind of got his foot really studded in the second half, and he tried to play on, but he just couldn't. Davies came on, and I thought actually Davies played quite well, but we'll come to Ben Davies later, because I'm going to have some gripes about that. But yeah, and also, Reguilon firstly, I think he Instagram storied something about he's fine after his injury, so hopefully that means it's not something that he's going to have any issues with to take into the fixtures after the international break. And a little word on Davinson Sanchez. Davinson Sanchez has got this scapegoat group of fans that just cannot ever see when he does something right. As anyone that's watched these knows, I'm not in that group. I do feel that, as I'll always say, I think he makes one silly mistake a game where he switches off. And on Sunday, it was a little moment right in the last maybe 5-10 minutes when he just mistimed his attempt to come forward to a ball on the left-hand side of the Spurs box from a Villa perspective. And the ball kind of bounced over him, and I can't remember who it was, but it got him behind him to the touchline. Other than that, I thought Davinson Sanchez had another positive game. There were a couple of little moments that weren't terrific, but on the whole, he was only 24 and he was really marshalling that back line, a very young back line. You could hear him instructing them, telling them when to step and stuff like that. He was helped. Lloris was vocal. Højbjerg, sometimes you could hear dishing out instructions, but on the whole, it was down to Sanchez to do that. And I thought he did it well. And it was a clean sheet. A clean sheet after the week Spurs had was a big thing. It was a big thing for that back line. I thought they were really good. And there was one moment for me that summed up exactly what Mourinho wanted. Ross Barkley in the final minutes, you might have seen this, had took down a ball when he went took him, his momentum took him into the box, probably about 8 yards out, maybe a bit more, 9 yards, and he smashed the ball. And then you suddenly saw, like a pincer movement, Tanganga, Sanchez and Ben Davies all throw themselves, absolutely put their body on the line to get in front of the shot. Sanchez kind of tried to move himself in, and the ball, Tanganga was the one who blocked it. It was a terrific block. Rodon also made a goal line block a little bit earlier, but it just showed on Thursday night, I don't think you'd have seen anyone bother to do that. Sunday night, totally different. All these players throwing themselves at it. And it was exactly, I didn't look across at Mourinho, but I bet he was absolutely kind of fist pumping that as much as the goals. There's one player who didn't come out so well on the video. That was Moussa Sissoko, because he kind of just rather rubbishly, just like slightly hung out a leg. It was very much a study of what Mourinho wants against that kind of slight lack of, not effort, but more desire, I suppose, is the way to do it, is to put your body on the line for everyone else and to keep that clean sheet. Interestingly, Mourinho after the game spoke about Sissoko's 8 minutes, and I couldn't tell. I mean, have a look at the quotes if you see them. They'll be on the website or on my Twitter feed, whatever. He kind of said about how, Sissoko coming on and getting players to do that and play out of their skin for even just 8-10 minutes. But I couldn't tell whether he was saying that Sissoko did that or whether he was kind of claiming that's what we need is for him as well to do stuff like that. I don't know. Have a look at them and make your own mind up. I don't want to say either way because that would probably be unfair, but I just felt in that moment very much you saw the younger players and Ben Davies, who is very much of that mentality, hurling themselves at the ball, and it was superb. And I think the key thing for Mourinho will have been looking at the 2 goals that Spurs scored. Don't worry, I know we're 19 minutes in, I haven't even mentioned the goals, but we're seeing that both goals came from Spurs winning the ball back with desire and intensity. The first goal, all about Lucas Moura, and I'm going to come to Lucas Moura, don't worry. Lucas Moura winning the ball back, a poor kick out. He picked up the ball, 1-2 with Harry Kane, which was perfectly weighted, and he passed it across to Vinicius to score. So that was all about Lucas winning the ball back. And in the second goal, You probably won't have seen it because all the focus will be on the penalty decision itself. But that ball was won back by Tanguy Ndombele twice. He kind of won it back, and unfortunately the ball kind of rolled to a Villa player, but then he went back and won it again. He showed real aggression. You could hear Mourinho on the sideline going, Tanguy, and really applauding him. So he won the ball, and I think he spread it to Lucas, who then passed it into Kane, and then Kane was brought down. As for the penalty decision itself, it's one of those. If you were an Arsenal fan, which I'm sure you're not watching this video, you would maybe argue there was an element of what happened with Lacazette and Sanchez in the striker messing up his shot, cross, whatever it was, and then his momentum taking him into the challenge. I'd say maybe my difference between the two would be, I can definitely see how people would see that, but for me, I felt Lacazette smacked into Sanchez last Sunday. Whereas I felt with Kane's one, it was more his foot came back down or was planted when it wouldn't have been had he taken the shot properly. And then Cash came in and swept his leg and he went. So for me, slight difference, it's very subtle, was that Lacazette hit Sanchez's foot, whereas Kane's foot was dragged away by Cash. And to be fair, Dean Smith, straight after the game in his press conference, said it was Cash's fault. He said that was silly and it was unnecessary. So, you know, whatever other people say, the Aston Villa manager himself has seen it back and said it's his own player's fault. So, yeah, and then Kane was never going to miss that, was he? He just doesn't, he gobbles them up. But yeah, I want to talk about Lucas Moura. Lucas Moura, as anyone knows, I'm quite tough on because, as I always say, I think there's more about him. He should be doing more in the end product of his game. And I feel in the last few weeks, we're really seeing that. And I think it's because he's a lovely guy. He's a brilliant guy to interview. He's very clever. I remember having a great chat in a pre-season in America a couple of years with him, with a couple of other journalists. And he's so intelligent. He's got such an incredible backstory, kind of the way he grew up in really tough areas in Sao Paulo. Such a family guy, a very, very nice guy. So it's my frustration with him has never, ever been in any case coming from not liking him, anything like that. I'm not that kind of person. I don't get all of that. We can not like someone you might not even know, as social media shows us. But no, with Lucas, for me, it was always, there's incredible skills, footwork, pace, but there wasn't always the end product, I think, to match that. And I think he's better than he's been. He can be better than what he has been. And I think the last few weeks we've seen that. Shifted into a more central role. I mean, just look at the figures. I wrote them down somewhere here so that I didn't forget it. And I can't find them. So I think roughly it was something like he had... I've got them. So 1 goal and no assists. And we're talking about the Premier League. He's done very well in Europa League and the cup competitions. He's kind of thrived. You know, critics would maybe say against teams of a lesser standard than you get in the Premier League. But in the Premier League itself, 1 goal, 0 assists from September to February. That's not good enough for Lucas Moura. Lucas Moura is better than that. But what you've seen now in the last 8 games, you've had 2 goals and 3 assists. That's where it's at. That's so much better. That's exactly what Lucas Moura can do. And for a team that was flagging in terms of desire and confidence and having to work bloody hard, you want Lucas Moura today. It's a bit like Lamela in that respect. They will give you everything they've got until they are literally collapsing on that pitch. And that's exactly what we've heard a lot from Lucas in recent weeks. He's been put up for interviews. He was put up for the press conference before the Zagreb game. And I think that's because Spurs, maybe slightly cynically, know that he represents everything kind of good about Tottenham right now and what people want from the team. And that's a good thing. But yeah, no, I thought he was terrific. You know, both involvements in the Vinicius goal and also in Kane's goal, and hopefully that continues. I'd say in the number 10 role, he's not a natural creator. He still has a desire to get out wide, but I think starting him in the middle and then drifting out, he's more effective than staying out wide and acting as a winger, because I don't really believe, although that was a really good low cross to Vinicius, I don't believe his crossing ability, you know, the normal bog standard crosses are probably up to where you want them to be. But in terms of quick feet, trying to get into the box and playing quick balls to other players, he's good at that. And it's great to see him doing well. And I think he really, maybe him and Kane and Højbjerg, obviously in that defence, really inspired Tottenham on Sunday. They drove them forward, and a lot of the good things came from Lucas and what he did. And I want to touch on briefly the central pairing up front. I say pairing, it was a funny one. It was Vinicius was very much the big man up front. Kane flitted between being up there with him and in the middle of a three with, it's gone completely out of my head, Lucas and Lo Celso behind him. It kind of worked. I wouldn't say, it's a partnership that's never been started before in any game, let alone the Premier League. So it's not going to be a natural fit yet. It's, Son and Kane have been playing together for, 5 years, 6 years? 5 years, I think it is. So it was never going to be the most natural fit. Vinicius, he's a poacher. He's a goal-getter. He very much knows where that net is. I think he's still got a lot to work on in his hold-up play. There's some nice little moments, but overall it's not probably quite the standard it needs to be yet for the Premier League. But you know that if the ball, there's a lot of times when the ball got into the box and he was there. He'd peeled away from a defender. He's got that instinct that every very top poacher, striker, whatever you want to call him, needs. It's an interesting one with Vinicius. You look at his stats. That was his 9th start for Spurs. And in his 9 starts, he scored 9 goals. Yes, you could say there's the hat-trick against Marine, an 8th tier team in the football ladder. But there's no denying that he's scored those goals. I think he's got 10 in 21 in total. But you look at it and it's his 10 goals have come from 984 minutes. Whereas Kane, for example, for context, is 3,171 minutes he's played. So I think Vinicius has done really well. Again, he's very raw. He's 25. He, was a defender only a few years back, and he's kind of had to change his game. And it's a bit of a late bloomer, as it were. And we know he's had some tough times in his personal life as well. But I'd say he's succeeded where others haven't. That role in being the Harry Kane backup is a very difficult role. Really difficult. It's not an enviable task for many because you're not going to play many minutes and you've got to come in and be sharp and ready to score goals whenever you're called upon. You look at Vincent Janssen, and I wanted to give Vincent Janssen so much time, but it just never worked for him. Fernando Llorente, it worked in a sense of being a big man as a foil late in games, but I'd say only so much in the second season. But in terms of goals, nothing in the terms of goals. I'd have to check. It's something I haven't looked up. But I'd imagine Vinicius has probably scored as many goals so far in his first season than Llorente scored in both of his. I'd have to check that, but I wouldn't be shocked if that's the case. And then anyone before, Soldado, Adebayor, anyone that's had to kind of play second fiddle to Kane has struggled. And I think if you look at it on paper, I think Vinicius has done really well for his first year at a new club, new culture, doesn't know the language very well, he's still doing interviews in Portuguese. I think he's done well. Do I think Spurs are going to shell out 40 million to make his move permanent? No, I do not. Or just under 40 million. I think it's about 38, something like that. No, I do not. But I'd be very surprised. And this is purely, I'd say, because of the pandemic as well. Finances are just mullered at Tottenham, as they are at all clubs, apart from the very cash-rich ones. But what I would say is that I do imagine that Daniel Levy will go back to Benfica and he'll say, look, you're not going to get 40 million pounds from anyone. It might be 40 million euros actually, but you're not going to get that money from anyone. Not right now, because the big, the PSGs, Man City, those teams that are unaffected really by the pandemic are not going to pay. They're not going to buy Carlos Vinicius and not going to spend that sort of money. However, we'll offer you, 15, 17 million, something like that. They'd have to sell some players first, as I said before, unless they do a very intelligent finance deal for it. But I think you could do a hell of a lot worse than bringing in Carlos Vinicius again or permanently as a backup for Kane, because I think he's only going to get better. I think he's going to develop further and further in the Premier League, and he seems, I want to use the word grateful because that's patronising, but he seems just absolutely delighted to be playing in the Premier League. It's a dream, for a lot of footballers, and he's doing it. And I think he would take the same situation he's had now, maybe for a bit more minutes, and he will get that. The more he adapts, the more time he'll get on the pitch. I think that's a deal you really have to try and look at doing. Look, I know that everyone out there is like, I want Dybala, I want Danny Ings, I want all of this, blah, blah, blah. But if Kane is staying, I'm sorry, but your options are limited. Even the likes of Danny Ings will not come and play a bit part alongside Kane. They're not going to play regularly up front together every week. They don't, especially if Son is there. It just doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. So you need to get your head into the space of who is a good man to come in for Kane. And obviously we all want Kane to stay in the summer. And, I've said this before and I'll repeat my opinion on this. Harry Kane may well in the summer want to go off and win trophies elsewhere. My opinion has always been, I think Harry Kane, as soon as he signed that long-term deal with Spurs in, 2-3 years ago, he's got a contract up to 2024. And there's probably, wouldn't be shocked if Spurs have an option to make it a year longer, maybe. That's not saying that for definite, but they just do in most of their contracts. I think as soon as he signed that deal, he essentially pretty much handcuffed himself. A golden handcuffs deal, as they call it, and I think in showbiz, like TV deals, they call it that. But essentially, because he's getting great money or very good money, I think he kind of handcuffed himself to Tottenham for maybe the rest of his career, which is great for Spurs fans, but it's purely because with that amount of time left on his contract and how good he is right now, he is a player whose value has only gone up. Maybe last summer you could have said with the injury problems, you could have said, oh, well, the pandemic and everything, his fees will have come down that Spurs would ask for him. Not a chance. Harry Kane has scored 27 goals and 16 assists in 40 matches this season. He's the top goal scorer in the Premier League. He's the top assist maker in the Premier League. He's just incredible. He's a machine. So whatever someone out there might be thinking of, Kane will be cheaper than Haaland or Kane will be cheaper than Mbappe, I think he's right up to the same price, if not more, because it's Daniel Levy you're dealing with. So I think, I don't know whether clubs will pay that or even make that offer. And I do think he's a player that's so impossible to replace. I don't see you, because he's a number 9, a number 10, a number 8 and a number 6, is just ridiculous amounts of stuff he does on a football pitch. You can't replace him with one player. You're having to replace him with 2, maybe 3 top players who maybe you'd struggle to even get for the price that you'd get for him, the money you'd get for him. So, yeah. So I kind of was on Vinicius there, but I've gone off on a tangent about Kane because I wanted to talk about him anyway. But yeah, so I'd say get Vinicius if you can for a cut price because I think he's a very, very good backup who will only get better. And Kane, it sounds awful to say, but I kind of do hope that he's stuck at Spurs and he has to. For him, of course, you only want the best for people and players. And yes, I think he could go anywhere, score goals anywhere. I even saw a link with Real Madrid. I don't think Real Madrid could afford him. So I can't remember who it was. Some Spanish media outlet was saying, but Spurs have got a great relationship. Just look at the Reguilon Bale deal, stuff like that. I think the money that it would take to cost Kane, to buy Kane, even Real Madrid would really, really struggle with. But yeah, so that's Kane and Vinicius. I'm not going to go on too much of that. But yeah, it was just interesting to see them as well, playing together. A little quick word on Lo Celso and Højbjerg. I've kind of touched on Dembele. Lo Celso, I thought, a bit rusty, as he would be. He's barely played for 3 months, but he'll come good. I think we'll see a lot more from Lo Celso. He's one of those players Mourinho can trust and will put in the intensity. He's done pretty well. Bearing in mind he had to play extra time in Zagreb, and I thought he was one of the players who was trying to make stuff happen. And then he got, was it about more than an hour under his belt? I can't remember how long he lasted, maybe 70 minutes. So that's terrific. So you'd imagine after international break, he'll be ready to start matches. But yeah, more to come from him. And I thought Højbjerg was very much kind of more back to where he was. He still looks a bit knackered as he gets near end of games. I think, I hope he doesn't overdo it on international duty. I mean, he's a player for Denmark that isn't quite the guaranteed first choice for them. Well, certainly in the past when I've seen them. So he may get less minutes, which would be great. Because I do think he needs a little bit of a rest. But I think Spurs benefited from having him back in that midfield. Whereas on Thursday, they really needed him to just grab a hold of everyone and say, what the hell are you doing? And that didn't happen. I think he was necessary for that. So yeah, I kind of touched on there. The international break is upon us. Every club journalist like myself's nightmare, and probably a lot of fans aren't massively delighted with it. Although I would say, with the schedule, you're probably pretty much going to get a match every day. So at least football continues. But yeah, I mean, I think it's probably come at a good time for Tottenham. Even though they won, I still think everyone in the club just needed to stop and take a breath. It's one of those where I think clearly it was a little bit toxic after the Zagreb game. But whatever happened, whether it was leaving certain players out or having a good old chat about it or players coming together and just, Kane said after the game, it was embarrassing on Thursday night. It was absolutely embarrassing. And I think that's quite important for him to say. He was clearly one of those angry players that Mourinho was talking about he wanted to play. And I think everyone just had to go away and have a little break. I'm going to get into other Gareth Bale quotes in a moment, but I saw another bit he was getting criticised for was that he said sometimes when it's a tough time at a club, it's good just to get into a different environment for a little bit and focus on something else. And that kind of everyone's taken it as, I think perhaps because of the other quotes we'll talk about in a bit, everyone was leaping on that as well. But he was absolutely right. I think sometimes you just need a change of mood, a change of mindset. A little distance from a situation will often make you look at it in a different way. When you're in it, everything is over-egged. Everything is the worst thing in the world. And I think sometimes you step out of it and you look at it and you think, you know what? Let's just crack on and make this work. And I think maybe that's what Spurs need right now. A lot of players just to head off, enjoy themselves, meet some people that they haven't been in bubbles with, so they haven't been seeing much, and kind of bring back a better mood and a better atmosphere to the camp when they come back. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it gives Mourinho some time to think. And I mean, you look at the players that are still at Tottenham in the next fortnight. Son and Reguilon, both obviously recovering from their injuries. Lo Celso, Lucas, Lamela, Sanchez, Vinicius, Ali and Winks. So that's a very diverse bunch in terms of ones who've been playing, ones who probably aren't too happy. I mean, the likes of Ali and Winks, Mourinho can now just have a sit down, have a moment to pause and chat and discuss what's happening. If they are two players that potentially could be heading off in the summer, he says to them, look, if you're going to go, you're going to go. But I want you to not kind of, and again, this is not saying this has been the case, but just, be a part of this squad, be supportive of it. Lloris's comments about people coming in, we can kind of only assume that's the likes of Ali and Winks. I mean, certainly when they came off in Zagreb, both of them looked like they wanted to strangle Mourinho, to not put too fine a point on it. They both looked entirely very unhappy, but neither of them had deserved to stay on. They were both pretty poor on the day. So whether there's constructive conversations that can go on there, and other players will, I think Mourinho will probably look at it and say, look, Spurs compared to last season, and this is what I mean about stepping out and looking at a situation again. Mourinho might look at it and say, Spurs are 7 points better off than last season. They're 2 places higher in the table. They've scored 2 more than last season. They've conceded 10 less than last season. They've got the 4th best goal tally in the Premier League and the 3rd best defence. On the face of it, he has improved Spurs from where they were last season. I think clearly the key for Mourinho and the expectations is that Spurs wanted him to improve Spurs from where Pochettino had them at his pomp, as it were, at his best. When Spurs are finishing 3rd, 2nd, 3rd in the table and stuff like that, and obviously eventually reaching a Champions League final. So yes, he can say, look, there's an upward curve. We are improving from where we were, but obviously the what he's needed from him and the players, obviously different kind of situation maybe, but he's needed to then take it to the next level. There's other ways of looking at the current matches. You could look at it and say, you had that terrible run in 2021 and then this week has brought 2 utterly rubbish defeats again. You could also look at it and say Spurs have won 6 out of their last 8 matches. This is the way football is. And this is why I'm saying it's so important to sometimes get yourself out of the bubble. It's probably the wrong word to use right now, but I suppose it's actually apt as well. And then look at it and say, okay, we're 3 points off fourth place. This is doable if we kind of just get our heads into it. And, if you are thinking you're going to leave Spurs in the summer, don't leave Spurs under a cloud. Do it having got the club back to where it belongs, back in that Champions League. And there's a Carabao Cup final. All of these players could end up with the winner's medal that they've craved. Yes, it's Manchester City. Yes, it's one of the best teams in Europe, if not the best right now. But there'll be a whole week to prepare for that match. We know Mourinho and his big game mentality. He will have them utterly fine-tuned and prepared for that game. They will be fresh. Hopefully, fingers crossed, there's no injuries. And, City, maybe not, but they might have one eye on having their Champions League game a couple of days after the final. Spurs need to go into that with confidence. They've been a bogey team for Man City in recent seasons, even this year, beating them at home. And Wembley is certainly no strange place for Spurs. They know it very well. So by all means, if you can go away, catch your breath, regather, come back, there's a lot that can still be achieved by Tottenham this season. Yeah, it's been a rubbish week. I mean, crashing out the FA Cup before to Everton was rubbish. Crashing out in appalling circumstances, Zagreb was so bad. But it's still all to play for. 3 points off fourth place. You remember last season, and again, I don't want to compare last season too much this season because last season was just a mess of a season and they had the injuries, they had everything. But the gap is far less at this point in the season now to catch up. If Spurs can put a run together, and you look at the fixtures, yes, April's tough. Once you obviously get Newcastle struggling away, if you could beat them, then you're in a terrific position. Then you've got Man United at home, Everton away. Tough games, but if they've got some momentum going into those games, who knows? But then you look at May, and the names escape me, but I think you've got Leeds away, you've got Villa again at home, I think it is, Southampton, Wolves, and then obviously finishing with Leicester. There's a run of games, especially ones being at home, that Spurs have got a little bit of oomph about them and momentum. There's no reason they can't, in those final weeks, still be battling for a top four place. But it's all about mentality, desire, all of those things that Mourinho desperately wants. Bale. Let's talk about Bale. So, a lot of people getting very upset about his comments yesterday. What I would always say, and this is probably a feature of me that winds people up, but look at everything in its entirety. That's why I am really happy that I get to put full transcripts up of press conferences. Obviously, I didn't for this because it was a Wales press conference, but always look at everything. Look at the question, look at the full answer, and listen to it if you can, or watch it. What happens is Twitter aggregator accounts of quotes and stuff, and I do this as well when I'm having to bash out quotes onto Twitter from press conferences. Sometimes you just squeeze it all together and you try and get the best bits into a tweet. You've only got so much room, and often words can look a hell of a lot harsher in characters on a thing as you read them in your head rather than actually listening to them. And I think if you watch Bale's press conference, so the question was, do you have do you want, essentially it was, do you want your future kind of wrapped up and sorted before the summer so that it doesn't distract your focus from the Euros and Wales and stuff like that? It was very a Wales-dominated question. It was all about that. And he just said, look, no, it's not a distraction. He says the original plan, and as far as I'm aware, essentially the plan was to do a year at Tottenham, was to get minutes, get game time. And then he paused slightly and he said, he said that's the primary concern. And then he said, and also to be able to be match fit for the Euros. And then he said, and as far as I was aware, the plan was to go back to Real Madrid at the end of it. In that way of saying it, for me, there's not really much wrong with that. And I'll explain why. I mean, first off, people have kind of wrapped the match fitness thing into one big thing, which he kind of wasn't. He was saying my priority was to play football again, was to get minutes, which is exactly what it was. And, he's said enough about Spurs. He's said about his love for Spurs and how coming back, and his agent, Jonathan Barnett, has said it was the only place he wanted to go. So let's not just try and suddenly look at it as like, oh, he was using us as a training ground. It's not the case. And then the returning to Real Madrid, honestly, and maybe this is just the journalist head on me, that is the most bog standard reply to a loan, ending of a loan spell question ever. Honestly, I've asked enough of those to players on loan. That is exactly what they say. There's no disrespect to your employer. You just say, well, as far as I'm aware, this was the original plan. Play for a season and then I will be heading back to my club. Oliver Skipp was asked pretty much the same kind of thing in his England under-21 press conference that he did the other day. And he said the same thing. It's like, it's not up to me kind of thing. What happens. He's not criticising anyone. He's not slating anyone. He's not doing anything. So I don't really kind of get the anger of that. There was a lot of, I don't know, as if like, how dare he? But if you look at Bale, he's been quite consistent. Whatever his situation in Madrid, he hasn't really lashed out. He hasn't pretty much, I'm trying to remember any occasion, the flag thing that was thrown in his hands of Wales Golf, Madrid in that order or whatever it was. But in terms of public interviews, he's always remained quite professional and just said, look, bang, 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 this is what it is. I'm a Madrid player. This is what I'm meant to be doing, whatever. And he was very much the same at Madrid. And I don't think these comments are any different to any player on loan, really. He's not going to come out, whatever passionate fans want to hear, he's not going to come out and say, oh, God, I hope I can stay at Spurs. I really don't want to go back to Madrid. Oh, that'd be awful. That's not what you do. You don't talk about your employers like that. And as I've said before, as I'm aware, the deal for Spurs, they've got this first option. If they want to approach again for a second loan on the same terms, they can do that. Obviously, Bale has to agree to that as well. That's a decision that is made at the end of the season. It's not now. So Bale is not, being told, hey, lad, we're bringing you back. Especially because, he hasn't had a sustained period of form to make that such an easy decision either, to bring him in on, they're paying roughly 40% of his wages, roughly 220, something like that, a week, maybe slightly more. That's a decision that will be made later. So for him right now, why would his comments say anything about, oh, please bring me back? He's not going to say that. That's not how it works. So yeah, I kind of felt that was a little bit, I wasn't, and yes, whether intentionally or not, he is sending a little bit of a message to Spurs. In his mind, his relationship with Mourinho hasn't been ideal. There's no getting away from that. Mourinho barely played him for 2 months. Of course it isn't. Barely came onto a Premier League match. So it's not the perfect melding of two people together, although Mourinho did want to buy him for Real Madrid back in 2012, the year before he actually came and Mourinho had already gone from Madrid. But yeah, it hasn't been the most easiest of relationships, clearly. I think there's been attempts on both sides to work for each other, and clearly, he managed to get him to a level, and Bale got himself to a level. But there's probably a little element of maybe Bale thinking, well, do I want to come back next season again if Mourinho's there? There's also an element of, like I said, that the Spurs probably haven't even made any intention clear to him whether they're going to do that yet or not. And the flip side is in Madrid. It probably puts a little bit of a rocket up Madrid, because who thought Madrid is stuffed, financially as well. They're going to have big problems. They're going to have to sell players too. There's probably a little bit of oh my God, are we going to have him back on his, whatever it is, £625,000 a week wages? Or, will Zidane, if the season doesn't end their way particularly well, is Zidane going to be there for Bale next season? Could it be a whole new thing? I'd personally suggest that Real probably wouldn't want, even for a new manager, to have Bale on his huge wages for his final year there. I'd imagine Madrid, ideal scenario, is still someone like Spurs taking him off with a portion of his wages, or probably ideally for them, just taking him entirely, which I think will be a much trickier thing, unless he agrees to an incredible wage drop. And obviously, he's also 32. He'll be this summer. So, yeah, I just thought it was a big old overreaction to that yesterday. Maybe just people a bit annoyed of what's happening at Spurs right now, and this was another thing to get annoyed about. But I didn't quite buy into all of that, to be honest. And the last thing I just want to say before I wrap up, sorry, I'm aware I've been waffling for ages. Ben Davies. I found it entirely unpleasant yesterday. Wales announced that Bale had withdrawn from the... Wales announced that Ben Davies had withdrawn from the squad with what Robert Page, the interim boss while Giggs is going through all of his mess, that it was a significant injury for Davies. We'll find out a little bit more as this week goes on, but it doesn't sound good, obviously. There were comments underneath the Spurs one, and even when I retweeted the original quotes saying, why is that bad news? That's good news. And it was like, I must admit, I hate that so much. Wishing injury on any player or being happy at injury. And that's wrong in every circumstance. But even more so when it's someone like Ben Davies, who will, like I said with the block he tried to make for a Barkley shot, he will put his body on the line for the club every day. You know, you talk about people loud or love these players who maybe don't have their full heart at Tottenham. Ben Davies will do everything for Tottenham Hotspur. He might not be the most spectacular left-back in the world. He might not be one of the greatest players to ever have graced the Premier League. But my God, he gives everything for Tottenham every single week. And I think... and I know people don't agree. I think he's a really good squad player. I think he has impacts on matches in a positive way. I think he maybe doesn't have the attacking qualities that others do, although I'll always go back to that season when Rose was injured and he was the most creative defender in the Premier League in chances created. But I think he's a solid guy, a solid player who can play at left back, who can play at centre-back, filling in as well. He can make systems work, and he's the kind of guy that can pick up other players and just say, come on, sort it out, let's crack on with this. And I just thought it was really unpleasant is the word. It just kind of made my skin crawl seeing some of the tweets. It's just like, I know it's a fashionable thing, and I know sometimes it's like teenagers who are trying to sound, I don't know if it sounds cool or whatever they're trying to do on social media. I'm making myself sound incredibly old by saying that, but I don't get it. It's just this kind of thing about modern social media that just doesn't sit right with me. It's a bit like all the abuse that Steven Bergwijn got that's eventually made him first limit the comments that can be on his Instagram and eventually just remove everything Tottenham related from this season, because it's just like, what's the point? I didn't like that. There's a slight other side to this as well, in that you might have noticed, I put it out on Twitter, Jose Mourinho commented on Spurs official Instagram post about Davies. He commented underneath saying, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, he revealed that Ben Davies, even more so when I'm talking about putting everything on the line, had actually been slightly injured, but still put himself on the bench to be available. And then when Reguilon went on, had to come on for half an hour, played through with this injury, which has probably resulted in this significant injury he's now got. And Mourinho kind of said that, this is kind of what a guy he is, what a man, what a player, and all this. There's two sides to this as well. Mourinho has a bit of a thing about players playing with injuries. It's been a bit of an obsession. He very much is a guy that hates players not playing through pain because he feels all players should. Pochettino was a little bit like this. I remember him saying stuff like he had to sometimes have conversations with Winks, was one about his ankle. You're just going to have to get it into your head you're going to play with pain. I get that. I think it does result sometimes in scenarios like we've now got, with Davies being even more injured, and we're going to find out the extent of that as well. He's got this weird hang-up at the moment about being a man, and it just reminds me constantly, I don't know about anyone else, of there's a scene in The Godfather, in the wedding, Don Corleone's wedding, when they're all coming in, and on his daughter's wedding day, the Godfather cannot refuse any stuff, and he gets the singer-actor Johnny Fontaine comes in and starts weeping about some film he can't get or something, and Don Corleone kind of grabs him and goes, he's like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And Don Corleone grabs him and goes, you're going to be a man, kind of thing, but actually sounding like Marlon Brando rather than that crap impression. And it's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like Mourinho just shaking those players, come on, be a man. And it's like, it's a little bit outdated, and I get an element of it. I get about being a bit tougher and stuff like that, but kind of modern footballers, we know that they're very different makeup the way they are to other footballers, and I think when you do get Mourinho's critics that say he doesn't know how to relate to modern footballers, I do kind of feel like in moments like that, he slightly betrays himself with things like that. It doesn't come across brilliantly. But I get it. I get the logic. I think I get more the logic of sometimes you just got to suck it up and play on and just crack on with it. But kind of making out that you're not a man if you don't, I think you're just going into this kind of grey area, and especially making it publicly. And clearly it's a little bit of a dig at other people as well. But yeah, I'm going to get into a whole other area there of the ways of talking to people. But yeah, on the face of it, gutted for Ben Davies. Gutted that he would have had to see on social media, and his family would have had to see on social media people delighting at him getting injured. Very uncomfortable that makes me. I don't like it. Very unpleasant stuff. You wouldn't like it if something really crap had happened to you and everyone piled in saying, that's good news. Delighted to see it. And it's just like, I've always got this thing. Act the way you would in life to someone on the street. Act exactly the same way on social media. It's no different. Don't hide behind your computer. I don't like all of that. But anyway, starting to sound like a right moany old man. I'm going to head off there. What I might do next week, because it's international break, maybe do a Q&A. We'll dig one of those out. I haven't done one of those for a while. So leave your normal comments underneath. And if you want to also ask a question, or you want to leave a comment and then ask a question as well, whatever you want to do, I'll try to answer as many as I can in a Q&A next week. I try and do these on my day off, so apologies, this one's a little day later than it normally would be because of slight change with the international break in my rota. But yeah, I'll try and do it again next week. I'm not entirely sure what my day off is in midweek next week, but we'll do it again. So get all your questions in. I'll try and answer as many as I can, as many as I know the answers to. And yeah, so let's see what happens with Spurs after the break. All is not lost. There's a hell of a lot to play for. And let's just fingers crossed for no injuries in these 10 days or so ahead. And yeah, and as for yourselves, as always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Bye.